Isn't it funny how the perspective you take can shape the narrative of the story that you're covering? Because I feel like this situation could go two different ways, depending on which side of the fence you're on. What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Smash JT. The company behind Black Myth Wukong, Game Science, has sent out this letter, a stipulation of sorts, for content creators who are going to be covering Black Myth Wukong. And while it's not completely out of the question for something like this to exist in the first place, it is interesting the amount of limitations they're putting on people covering the game. With all the drama surrounding Black Myth Wukong, it's not necessarily surprising that this is happening, but they are limiting what people can say about it and how they're able to talk about it. And while, yeah, it's great to say, ha ha ha, Black Myth Wukong is telling these journos what they can and can't do and what they can and can't say, and these content creators, and yeah, game science all the way. I hesitate with that because it's a Chinese company and the CCP and hardcore communism. You want to really take a big step back from all that. But it is, I guess, really unfortunate that we live in a time when you need to put regulations and restrictions on what you're allowed to say about something because some people can't stop themselves from injecting politics and messages and narratives into everything they talk about. Hit that subscribe, give me a like, and check out smashjt.com for the full article discussing how Game Science has banned politics and feminism in any Black Myth Wukong early access coverage. And it doesn't stop there either. There are a lot of stipulations on people covering this game before it releases on how they're allowed to talk about it. Namely, that they have to talk about, I don't know, the game? Easier said than done for some people these days. And shout out to Legal Mindset, who presented this information to us on Twitter, stating Black Myth Wukong explicitly banning feminist propaganda amongst other things. Thoughts? And the notice states, by using the game key and creating content, you acknowledge that you have been informed of the following content and your statements are not related to the marketing team. Which is fairly standard. It's basically just telling the people, hey, you got an early game key, you can cover the game how you want. Just make sure when you talk about the game that you're talking about the game. And you're not part of the marketing team, you're just giving your honest thoughts and feedback about it. Do's, enjoy the game. Well, that's pretty straightforward. What about the don'ts? Do not insult other influencers or players. Do not use any offensive language or humor. Again, fairly standard practices. You don't really need to say that kind of stuff, but I guess there's always a one-off that they just want to cover their ass and say, hey, try to represent our game in a good light by talking about it without sounding like a jackass. But here's where it gets really interesting. Do not include politics, violence, nudity, feminist propaganda, fetishization, and other content that instigates negative discourse. And this is really interesting because they're telling the content creators that are getting the early access game key that they can't talk about anything outside of the game and what it relates to or what it could potentially stand for or anything like this. They're limiting what people are allowed to say about it. And honestly, even though I'm a big fan of how Game Science has handled themselves up to this point, I can't really get behind limiting what people are allowed to say about it. No matter how much I disagree with the other side and how I feel like their thought process is completely jagged and broken, they're still allowed to have it. And I honestly like to have their thoughts out there for all to see. Instead of forcing them to hide it, we're now forcing them to adhere to rules. Again, coming from a communist party, the CCP in China, heavily regulated, which is ironic, like Hypnotic was saying, for us to be siding with the CCP is something that I feel like I would never say in my entire life. But unfortunately, the way mainstream media in America has been acting and how it's basically turned into communism themselves, that It's almost like you go with the lesser of two evils on this one. I guess from reading that one line there, you could just go with game science is sick and tired of the IGNs in the world, the gamers of the world, the Kotakus of the world, ganging up on them, berating them, trying to make them look like a horrendous, horrific organization, corporation that's just the most sexist, horrific, feminist, anti-feminist, propaganda pushing driven, like the worst group of people you could put in a room together. Like that's what these journalists, the activists that are pretending to be journalists, have tried to make game science out to be. And game science is probably taking the position of, we're kind of sick of this. We're not going to be bullied and pushed around by you guys anymore. If you're getting a game key, you're not allowed to talk about any of this stuff. And fair is fair because of what you've pushed us to. And from that perspective, I get it. I don't necessarily love it, but I get it. But it goes on. Do not use trigger words such as quarantine, isolation, or COVID-19. It's just kind of weird. Like, I know China was very heavy into the COVID stuff back when that was big, but that's kind of past now. So it's just strange to be calling that out in a game that really has nothing to do with it. I guess they're looking at it as like the you play as a monkey and the monkeypox and Wuhan and the virus and all this stuff that goes into it. They're just like, let's not even joke about that, which again, I get it. I don't necessarily love it, but I can see where they're coming from and why they're trying to be extra cautious and what people are allowed to say about this game. Because ultimately, even if people are joking and just making light of situations, the way journalism has become and what it's turned into has turned into this propaganda pushing narrative that's looking for anything, even if it's said as a joke, to turn it and twist it into a narrative pushing it as game science is bad. And game science is sick of that. They don't want that happening anymore. Do not discuss content related to China's game industry policies, opinions, news, etc. So, again, they want people to focus on the game, which is fair. At the end of the day, they busted their ass. They put so much time and effort and work into making this the greatest piece of art, the greatest game they could potentially ever make. And they want people to enjoy the game. They don't want people to try to reach and say, oh, the game's good, but it comes from China, so because I don't like the CCP, I'm not going to buy that game. Or the game's all right, but the monkey reminds me of some cultural narrative that doesn't have enough inclusion in it, and because of that, these people are bigots. Like, that's what game science is trying their best to avoid. They already saw what Rebecca Valentine did at IGN and how she purposefully mistranslated information to paint game science as the most horrifically bad organization out there with an agenda because supposedly, allegedly, game science did not sign on with one of these game consultant mafia groups. And because of that, the nose ring mafia that's in cahoots with them was going after them. And by all accounts, that's exactly what it looks like has transpired. Game science has gone the professional route and chosen not to engage directly with any of those claims. They've focused instead on their upcoming game release and maintained a stringent policy on content creation. The stance underlines a much broader intent to control the narrative surrounding their games. They've let it go for too long. They've given people lots of freedom, and we see exactly what these game journals have done with that freedom, trying to destroy this organization. But again, I feel like that's fair because now that we see the information out there, we can see exactly the type of people that these are. Like, if you try to control the freedom of expression and what people are saying, then you start to hide the actual intentions that some of these nefarious people have. I get it. I'm not saying that game science is in the wrong. I'm not saying that what they're doing is awful. All I'm saying is I prefer to people having their freedom of saying and doing whatever they want to do if they're going to be covering a game, and let the audience decide based off the information provided to them. The truth always comes out. But despite all of the negative press that the Nose Ring Mafia has been trying to throw at Black Myth Wukong, it has continued to garner significant attention throughout the entire gaming community, topping Steam wishlist charts and getting a ton of positive press from lots of influencers out there. It's showing a strong continued interest throughout the entire gaming community as the release approaches. The policies set by Game Science here will definitely spark lots of debates about freedom of expression versus the desire for non-politicized entertainment spaces. But at the end of the day, that's where we're at with an industry full of professionals that are completely destroying it from the inside out. And ultimately, this is the result of it. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. If you guys want more information, check out smashjt.com. I will link this article in the description below. If you appreciate what I'm doing, please consider hitting that join button. And as always, you stay smashing.
Smash JT.